Hello, I'm David Winstead, and this is the program In the Know on Channel 16, and thank you for joining me. I have two great individuals here this morning. I got Chris Conklin, who is Director of Transportation for Montgomery County.
Morning.
And good morning. And I know you joined the county back in 2016, I think, and head of policy for a number of years.
Yes.
Great. I mean, Chris also has 23 years of experience in the private sector, just like Wes Guckert, who's president of the Traffic Group, and a company that's been in existence since 1986, correct? Mm-hmm. Which you founded. And both are major experts in transportation. And as we know, transportation is always a major issue here in Montgomery County and the municipalities in Montgomery County, 19 of which represent and support this channel. So we will talk this morning about issues on projects and transportation and congestion and BRT. We will hope it's of great interest to everybody. Chris, starting with you, the county executive, who we worked with together a number of years ago, is very supportive of BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, and it has a very innovative approach to basically transit and right-of-way use of express buses around the county. Can you tell us a little bit about the BRT projects? I think they've been 3 in the last year that you have implemented. US 29 West, you have some experience there, but several others. And I think people would be very interested in sort of hearing how that element of transportation is being implemented in the county.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The Bus Rapid Transit system is intended to cover the entirety of the county and provide a new set of options for people to be able to move between our activity centers on transit in buses that are more comfortable than traditional buses. In many cases, they have their own lanes on the road. There are fewer stops, so the trip is faster. The payment of fare, if we continue to collect fare, is easier. Bicycles go on board the vehicles. They all have Wi-Fi, and it's a much more seamless way to get around the county. Right now, we have several different bus rapid transit projects in development. The one that is furthest along is the Veers Mill Road corridor between Wheaton and Montgomery College, Rockville, and we are finishing up the final design of that project, and it's in the process to receive federal funding and is fully funded primarily with state funds provided by the state delegation from Montgomery County to move that forward. We're also working on the 355 corridor, which extends from Bethesda to Clarksburg, and that project is 22 miles long, so it's going to be a little bit more complicated to implement. And we are moving forward with a segment right now between Montgomery County, Rockville, and Montgomery County, Germantown that will connect to that Veers Mill project. And we will have a very significant BRT corridor extending from the Germantown Town Center to Wheaton with that project. And we're also looking to move that project forward with state aid. There are some other projects that are a little bit further behind in their development. One of them is the North Bethesda Transitway, which goes between the Westfield Montgomery Mall and the North Bethesda Metro Station that will connect to that 355 corridor and the planned health computing cluster that's in development at the North Bethesda Transit Center. We are also working on the New Hampshire Avenue Bus Rapid Transit Corridor, which extends from the Fort Totten Metro Station in the District of Columbia through to Colesville, roughly the intersection of Randolph Road and New Hampshire Avenue. Those 2 projects in our planning process, and if you're interested in those, there's ongoing public engagement in those planning efforts. The last project that's in our first phase is the Randolph Road corridor, which would extend from North Bethesda across the county, connecting to Wheaton and then to the FDA area in the East County. We have not yet started that project, but would like to start it in the near future. And then lastly, the US 29 corridor that you talked about started service in 2020. We completed all of that construction during the pandemic, which was quite a challenge. And that service has been quite successful and is now the busiest component of the entire county transit network. And that runs from Burtonsville to the Silver Spring Transit Center. This past fall, the county council selected a preferred alternative to add dedicated lanes to that project, and we've started the preliminary engineering of that. So we have a lot going on, covering a great deal of the county, and a couple of the projects actually have funding that gets them into construction right now, which is very exciting because there's been, as you know,
under the federal funding, you got a little bit for BRT, correct?
That's
Under
correct. We've received some federal funding.
Right.
We are entering the Federal Transit Administration funding program. There was more funds provided for bus rapid transit in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And the actions of the state legislature to secure dedicated ongoing funding for BRT construction plus one-time capital funding in the last 2 years has really jump-started our ability to get those projects moving into construction faster.
That's great. That's great. And I guess they're all, you're planning for all of them in terms of integration to any metro station that they might approximate, or light rail in some cases, right?
Yes, many of them are connected to
Yeah.
the metro stations,
Yeah.
the North Bethesda metro station being kind of a hub
Right.
of 3 of those lines, the Silver Spring Transit Center being critical to the US 29 project, both Wheaton and Rockville metro stations for the Veers Mill project. And then obviously we're going in Prince George's County in the District of Columbia to get to the Fort Totten metro station
Right, right.
for the New Hampshire Avenue study.
Oh, that's great. It's fabulous to hear that it's moving ahead that much. I know, Wes, you, a number of years ago, I did a little work, I think, for the Montgomery County Transit Task Force and looking at BRT. And one issue that I'd love to hear is the cost is a great advantage. I'm not the expert you all are, but that building a BRT where you have the dedicated right-of-way and can have the frequency and protected right-of-way is actually a lot cheaper, correct, than other sort of fixed rail alternatives?
Dramatically cheaper.
Yeah.
When you look at the Purple Line as a light rail system running between Montgomery and Prince George's County, that's going to end up being $300 to $350 million a mile.
Wow.
Versus the BRT projects that, depending on whether you're buying right away or you're putting the dedicated lanes in the median, you could be in $20 to $50 million a mile. Even if it spreads to $100 million a mile, it's still dramatically less.
Right.
And the 80-20 rule applies here. That is, you might only get 80% of the people on BRT that you would get on light rail, but the 80-20 rule says, man, you're still making a great choice by using BRT versus building light rail, as an example.
Right. Well, the other issue I'd love to talk about is the one of community safety and congestion. I know you've done a lot with a sort of Vision Zero. You've actually done studies for municipalities on Vision Zero. And what impact does that approach, trying to save pedestrian safety, but also make sure that the commuter has access to the arterial roads of the county or the state and get to work, or the delivery trucks can get in? Wes, you've done some work on, as I said, with some of the municipalities in the county. What are their desires when you get retained and they say, look, we want a safer community, we want to make sure pedestrians and bikes? It'd be interesting to hear that.
There's a dichotomy there that is very, very sensitive to both the community leaders and the commuters. You mentioned the commuters.
Right.
Commuters want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. The community says, look, we've got an epidemic of pedestrian deaths.
Right.
We need to slow the cars down. Well, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
You can't slow the cars down
and
get people to where they want to go from point A to point B quickly.
Right.
There's also a challenge with, you've got communities, you're saying, don't build any more roads, don't widen roads, because that becomes less safe. Well, that flies in the face of state and county everywhere, their guidelines for adequate public facilities.
Right.
In order to create capacity, you've got to build more lanes.
Right.
If you build more lanes, the cars are going faster.
Right.
Cars go faster, you've got an opportunity to hurt a lot more people in a big way.
Right.
So what we're finding is, coming out of the box, the communities want to have the cars slow down. The communities want to protect the pedestrians and bicyclists. I think the jury is still out as it relates to the communities, the commuters who are saying, you're slowing me down. You're taking away capacity in the road,
Right.
and therefore you're adding bikes and making them safer, but it's taking me longer to get to work. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act, correct, Chris? I mean, you work, your operating center, your traffic signaling operating center has to coordinate with the state and make sure that you've got efficient movement through the light systems, mount down major corridors. I know that. It's really a balancing act, right? You want communities and pedestrians to be safe on the one hand. You don't want people getting furious by being stuck in unnecessary congestion or...
I think the question is to have a set of expectations that's reasonable for both the pedestrians and bicyclists using these facilities,
Right.
and the motorists, the drivers that are driving on these roads.
Right.
You know, we set up an expectation that you're going to be able to drive 50 miles an hour on a street, when really it's safe for us to be going 20 to 30 miles an
Right.
hour on that street.
Right.
But the cues that we're giving to the driver aren't supportive of that, and it generates frustration when you're not able to drive the way you feel you should on that road. So as we look to change these networks, what we want to do is try to get more crossing opportunities of these streets so that people can cross safely,
Right.
and don't have to walk long distances to get to a safe crossing, which very often people won't do. They'll
Right.
take those chances and put themselves in harm's way. So getting more frequent crossing opportunities, and then having the road environment give an indication to the driver that they're supposed to be driving and they should be expect to be moving at 20 to 25 to 30 miles an hour instead of 30 to 50 miles an hour
Right.
on these facilities. And one way to do that is to have a denser grid of smaller scale streets, so that, yes, you can move as many cars, but without that 6-lane cross section that says,
Got it.
I'm on a high-speed road and should
Which
be moving
was sort of
fast.
the vision for 355, right? It was
It has
to
been.
incorporate BRT, but to basically make it a more pedestrian-friendly median and being able to get people to cross 355, which before you could never do, right?
Right,
So-
and a portion of that was to complete the road networks that are parallel to
Right,
355,
right.
so that 355 itself doesn't have to carry all of that traffic load in that area.
Right, right.
So that road can be smaller
Right.
and slower than it
Right.
is today.
So, Wes?
Let me point something out,
Sure.
and that's really important to understand. If you're hit by a car, a pedestrian or bicyclist at
Right.
20 miles an hour, you've got a 90% chance or higher of surviving. If you get hit by a car at 40 miles an hour,
Okay.
you got about a 10%
Wow.
chance,
Yeah.
15%
So
chance
it really
of
is a
surviving.
question of calming the traffic.
It's
right?
calming, it's
It's
speed,
making
and it
sure-
picks up on
Yeah.
what Chris said, is that there's a level of expectation by the commuter that he can get down Connecticut Avenue or Rockville Pike
Right.
at a speed to get him where he wants to go on time.
Right.
When in fact, we as a transportation community are encouraging walking and biking, and again, it flies
Yeah.
in the face of what the commuter is expecting,
Yeah.
and there needs to be, as we always, and we've talked about the fact that taking and narrowing streets will start to slow the cars
Right.
down. Adding side friction will start to
Right.
slow the cars down. That's really an important factor, that the expectations of the commuter
Right.
needs to be shown time and time again.
Right. Interesting. Well, we are going to take a quick break. We have a little break in the show. This is David Winstead, and this show is the In the Know show of Channel 16. And we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to our guests, Chris Conklin and Wes Guckert. Good day. This is David Winstead, and this is the program In the Know on Channel 16, Montgomery Municipal Cable. Thanks for joining us again. As I mentioned, we have two great panelists here this morning. We've got Chris Conklin, who's Director of Transportation from Montgomery County, Maryland, Wes Guckert, who's President of the Traffic Group, a local firm that does a lot of work in transportation. Gentlemen, before COVID, or when COVID hit 2.5 years ago, we had sort of that standard congestion demand on the roadway. And over the last 2.5 years, I do a lot of some transportation, a lot of real estate work. We've seen a substantial change in the work habits of Montgomery County residents, municipalities, and people nationwide. I mean, we're really in a transformative stage in terms of how people work in America. And obviously, you all deal with, with studies and looking at existing transportation systems and managing them and running them, ride on bus and all these other things. Wes, you look a lot at density and concentration and people needing to get to work and needing to get to buy food and that kind of thing. So what impact has working from home had on transportation delivery and transportation demand? Chris, I'll start with you on that.
Sure. We have a lot of information from our transportation operations. I think the one that's most telling is the use of the parking facilities that the county operates. And what we've seen is that people are spending less time at their workplace. So we used to have an average of a 6 to 7 hour parking duration in our parking facilities, and that's down to more like 3 to 4 hours.
Really?
So
Wow.
people may be coming in and working a partial day in the office,
Right.
and then working the rest of their day at home, and that also reflects a change in mix between people going to those business districts to maybe conduct a meeting, have lunch with colleagues, and then conduct the rest of their business at home. And you're not seeing as long a duration related to somebody getting to work at 7:30, leaving at 4:30 or 8 to 5 or whatever your pattern is.
Right.
So I think that's the most telling. The other thing that we've seen in our transit operation is that the off-peak travel did not really change. In fact, it may have gone up during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So, the people who are using the transit system on the weekend, the people who are using it in the midday, those are roughly the same. But that peak period that we used to design these systems around really isn't as significant anymore as it once was. And then in terms of our road networks, I'm sure Wes can give you more information on that than I can, but we've seen a real change in day of week. So we may still have very significant, principally afternoon peak periods, but not every day of the week like we used to. So there are certain days where it appears that businesses are operating their in-person days all on the same days, and people are doing their work at home days all on the same days.
Interesting.
And as this becomes more permanent,
Yeah.
it would be really good if we could work as a business community and through our commuter services operation to encourage people to work at home on
Certain
Mondays and
days.
Fridays
Yeah,
or
yeah,
on
yeah.
Tuesdays and Wednesdays rather than
right.
just Mondays and Fridays.
Because clearly trying to manage, on-ride buses or even Metro, understanding that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are high peak demand days and the others. But Wes, you sort of, you study development. You advise real estate people, owners of parking lots, owners of buildings. What are you seeing as a result of this?
It's interesting what Chris just said about Mondays and Fridays. Our team in our office have gone to one day a week. I'm allowing that to occur for a time being.
Right.
And what they've done is that they've said, you don't have to come in on Friday, week 1, and you don't have to come in on Monday in week 2, so that they get a 4-day long week. And so I'm sure that it's not just our team that's
Right.
doing that. It's a lot of others, number one. Number two, there's a big challenge with government review of adequate public facility studies, because we're finding that traffic is down 10, 12% or more in the evening peak hour. And then we've got state government saying, wait a minute, we've got counts from 2019 that are much higher than what you have in 2022, 2023.
Yeah.
And I say, we're in a different world.
Different world.
It's a
Exactly.
different time.
Yeah.
The other thing we've done and what we've looked at, and it picks up on parking, is that we've looked at about 2,000 apartment units. And we've determined that where the midday occupancy at the apartment units used to be 15 to 20%, it's now about 36%. So people are home midday. It's not causing a crisis for shared parking,
Right.
but nevertheless, there are more people staying home midday because of the work from home phenomenon.
Right.
And this happens to be
Yeah.
midweek, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
And we're sort of in a period where I think the developers and the building owners around are really adjusting to this. I mean, there are huge vacancy problems in office buildings throughout the metropolitan Washington area. I mean, huge. I mean, utilization of 50% of prior space. So we're really in a transition period. You would think from the commuting standpoint or the transit ridership standpoint, hopefully in transit ridership, you might see it pick up a bit, right? Particularly on those days where people are commuting from home. But interesting time, but we're still sort of in the middle of it, aren't we? I mean, you guys are on the county side sort of adjusting and looking at these patterns and trying to figure out what it'll impact in terms of future, like BRT in the future, that kind of thing.
I think you're going to find BRT will continue to grow.
Yeah,
I really do. I think you're going to find that heavy rail is going to continue to suffer.
Oh, okay.
And I think that WMATA right now is still at about 50-60% of what they were in 2019. Correct,
Right.
Chris?
I don't know the exact percentages, but it's clear that the
Right.
long distance commutes are the ones that have been most effective, and
Yeah.
the white collar workers, the office workers
Right.
most affected. But that's really, in this region, it's an outsized portion of the workforce, but it's
Right.
definitely not all of the workers.
Right.
And there's a strong contingent of workers that are working on site every day because that's what the jobs require.
Well, you know, it's very interesting because I saw a figure come out of, I think it was the I-270 Beltway study, but that like 60% of the people that are really in their cars, even during COVID and now post-COVID, literally don't have an option, right? They're service workers that need to get to a hotel or they need to.
And that's
you know,
why the buses are going to continue
Right.
To thrive, because
Right.
you've got a huge portion of the population that simply do not own cars,
Right, right.
And that they need to use transit
too.
and they're going to more use buses versus heavy rail.
Right.
So drawing on my past life when I was a competitor of Wes's, you know, the work trip defined the peaks, which is what we planned around, but
Right.
it's not the majority of travel.
Right.
The majority of travel is non-work travel to the grocery store, to the
Right.
school,
Soccer game.
to the soccer game,
Yeah.
to restaurants, to your other activities. That's about 60% of travel. So with the loss of that defined peak,
Right.
we're really looking at planning for the majority of travel now, not just the journey to work, which had been the model
Interesting.
previously.
So the new transportation bill, and you all must have been thrilled because it threw a lot of money in the marketplace for public agencies to develop new projects or to complete capital program stuff. Obviously, President Biden and Congress supported a huge investment in infrastructure nationwide in this country, and you can see it everywhere now. I mean, you can see the roads being worked on. But part of it was a sustainability goal that, we're a leader in the world in terms of trying to address climate change and the impacts. But I know the county, Chris, recently got some money, I think, for a hydrogen bus, right, plus fueling stations. So can you tell us a little bit about what sustainable transportation is going to mean like 10 years from now? I know that this must be a pilot project, right? But what role does that play over the next decade, for example, from here, looking at it?
So Montgomery County operates about 400 transit buses, and we are converting all of those to zero emissions energy sources.
Okay.
A good portion of those will be battery electric, and we've implemented a solar charging facility at our Silver Spring Depot that can charge about 70 of those vehicles.
Right.
One thing that's interesting with the way battery electric vehicles are now, the range of that vehicle is not sufficient to meet about half of our transit service requirement. The bus can go about 125 miles between charges. So we have to make a decision about, do we install charges at other locations and have the buses recharge out while they're in service?
Right.
Do we have 2 buses to serve every route and then deal with the issues of swapping drivers and swapping vehicles in the midday? Or hydrogen is another option, and hydrogen comes in a variety of different formats. Some are generated through industrial processes and may not be particularly green.
Right.
Others can be generated from water and sustainably generated electricity. And that's what we're looking to pilot, and what we received that federal grant for was to purchase 13 hydrogen-fueled buses.
Oh, really? 13, okay.
And to implement a green hydrogen fueling station at our depot that's in Gaithersburg.
Okay.
So we will have most likely a solar array at that depot that will generate the electricity that will then run a process to convert water into hydrogen.
Right.
That hydrogen fueling is much like natural gas. It's very quick, and the range of those vehicles is consistent with a conventionally fueled
Interesting.
vehicle. And the other thing that will allow us to do is to start to look at switching to green fueling for highway services and fleet maintenance equipment,
Right.
which need to run 24 hours a day during storm and weather events, and we can't have them idle for charging. So we really think hydrogen is going to be a portion of the portfolio that we use in the future to achieve zero emissions.
That's great. Wes, you've done a lot of studying on automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and you know, logically I've heard, I'm not the expert you all are, but I've heard that autonomous vehicles, there's an implementation phase. You know, some people are buying them now or can afford to buy them now, but it will be quite a while. Ultimately, when you do have autonomous vehicles, what impact in a positive way will it have on congestion? Because you take sort of the individual behavior out of the formula in a sense.
I'm beginning to become convinced that it's not going to have a positive impact on congestion.
Oh, really? Oh.
Because what's happened, and I was just in Phoenix a few weeks ago and used an autonomous vehicle from Waymo, and you see them driving around the city all the time empty because they're just waiting to get called to do a trip.
Right.
And so all of the research that I've done is that the cars are going to be driving around half empty half the time.
Interesting.
You pick up a trip, you pick somebody up at point A, you take them to point B.
Right.
Now they've got to go to the next place empty to pick somebody up from point C.
Got it.
I'm not convinced that it's
Interesting,
going.
because I know you've done quite a bit of study. So one last question that I have for both of you all. Obviously, your colleague on the state level did a great job in recent years sort of dealing with the reality of I-270 study on congestion and the American Legion Bridge. Governor Hogan just left office. Governor Moore, who I've met and had the pleasure of talking to on some transportation issues, is going to be addressing this issue of how do we deal with, fortunately I live in South County, but if I lived in North County or Frederick and was trying to get to work on I-270 every day, it'd be very challenging and I'd be very frustrated. So just a quick comment. We don't have long. Chris, I'll start with you. The state will proceed, correct? But what is your sense of where things will go?
Well, what we've heard is that the state's interested in a more robust multimodal solution to the 270 issues with a stronger transit strategy than may have been there before, but that there is a commitment to continuing to work to address the issues that trouble the American Legion Bridge and the 270 corridor, but there's still some road to go before we know exactly what that plan is.
But not necessarily the studies that have been done, that's going to remain decent investment, right? We've spent $150 million to kind of study.
Well, certainly there's a lot of learning that occurred through that work, and whether the solutions that are proposed are exactly what were outlined in those studies or not remains to be seen, but there's value in a lot of that work.
And Wes, to conclude with you, you've done a lot of work on managed lanes and HOT lanes, hot lanes and stuff. What's your...
I think it's important for government and the private sector to continue to point out that if you're interested in green solutions, having the congestion that we have on the Beltway in 270 is not
the way to go.
Okay? Because we need to be able to move the vehicles at a better pace in order to reduce the pollution. To me, that's really, really
Right.
important.
Right. Well, gentlemen, this has been great. I really appreciate it. This is In the Know program at Channel 16. I'm David Winstead, and we've had Chris Conklin, the head of transportation, Montgomery County, Wes Guckert, the president and founder of the traffic group. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.